What if the prophets weren't just speaking to their time, but to ours? What if, when Habakkuk looked at the corruption, the violence, and the injustice of his world, he wasn't only seeing ancient Judah, but a mirror of our digital age, where eyes are everywhere and privacy has become an illusion? In his cry to God, Habakkuk said, "Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing?" He saw a world collapsing under its own arrogance, where power corrupted judgment and truth was silenced. Thousands of years later, his words feel hauntingly familiar. We live in an era where every step, every word, and every face is watched, not by divine eyes, but by lenses, algorithms, and invisible systems that know more about us than we know about ourselves. The Bible says, "The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good." But today, humanity has built its own version of that omnipresent gaze. Cameras on every corner, satellites circling the Earth, artificial intelligence scanning billions of images in real time, an all-seeing eye, not of heaven, but of human creation. It claims to protect us, but what if it's learning to control us? Think about it. We've traded divine awareness for digital surveillance. We no longer pray to be seen by God. We broadcast our lives to machines that never sleep. Every like, every search, every move adds another pixel to the global eye watching the world. And while some call it progress, others whisper that we walking straight into a prophecy, one written long before technology ever existed. Habakkuk warned of a time when arrogance would build an empire too proud to fall, gathering all nations under its rule. Doesn't that sound eerily close to a world united under data, where power is measured not in armies, but in information, where truth is filtered and freedom feels conditional? Perhaps the prophet wasn't describing Babylon after all. Perhaps he saw something far greater, a civilization where man would try to become God, to see everything, to know everything, to control everything. And if that's true, then the all-seeing eye we've built isn't just technology. It's a reflection of our own desire to replace the divine with the digital. Because when humanity believes it can see all things, it forgets the one who truly does. Maybe that is why the words of Habakkuk still echo across time, not as a warning from the past, but as a mirror held up to our present. And if we look closely enough, perhaps we'll realize prophecy isn't something that happened. It's something happening. Stay with me, because what Habakkuk saw next might reveal the most uncomfortable truth of all. You see, the more I study these ancient prophecies, the more I realize they were never meant to stay locked in dusty scrolls. They were written for generations that would face the very things we seeing now. A world that watches itself, but forgets to look within. Habakkuk's voice isn't just echoing from history. It's whispering through the noise of our screens, through the data that defines us, through every silent corner of this digital empire we've built. And that's exactly why this message matters. Not just to me, but to you. Every time you like a video like this, every time you leave a comment or subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel. You're keeping these truths alive. You're helping the message of the prophets reach thousands of others who might be searching for the same answers, the same clarity, the same hope. The algorithms that rule this digital world don't respond to silence. They respond to engagement. When you press that like button, when you share your thoughts below, when you subscribe, you're telling the system that these ancient words still matter, that prophecy still speaks, that there are people who still care about truth in an age of deception. So, if this message resonates with you, if you believe that the past is revealing our present, then take a moment to show it. Leave a mark, because the more voices we gather, the stronger this light becomes against the darkness of confusion that surrounds us. And as we continue, remember this. Habakkuk didn't find peace by escaping the storm. He found it by understanding what the storm meant. What comes next might change how you see that storm, and the eye that watches within it. Habakkuk lived in a time when silence had become unbearable. He watched as corruption spread like a disease, infecting kings, priests, and the people who once swore loyalty to the truth. The righteous were trampled, justice was bought and sold, and violence ruled the streets. He looked around and saw a nation that had lost its moral compass, one that worshipped power more than purpose. In his anguish, he cried out to God, "Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing?" It wasn't rebellion, it was desperation, the kind that comes from seeing a world that no longer feels sacred. Habakkuk's words weren't whispered in comfort, they were shouted through tears. He wasn't just asking why God allowed evil, he was asking how long it would go unpunished. That same question, thousands of years later, still echoes in the minds of those who look at our world today. Because corruption hasn't vanished, it has simply evolved. It no longer hides behind thrones and temples. It hides behind screens, systems, and carefully crafted narratives. The faces of power may have changed, but the spirit behind it remains the same. We like to think that we've advanced, that technology has made us more civilized, more just, more aware. But look closer. The tools that promised transparency have become instruments of control. The systems that claimed to serve us now study us. Habakkuk's ancient cry feels painfully modern. Justice is perverted. He saw judges who no longer judged, leaders who exploited their people, and societies that celebrated lies more than truth. Doesn't that sound familiar? In the prophet's world, corruption was visible. Coins changing hands, bribes taken in the open. In ours, it's digital, invisible, coded into algorithms that decide what we see, what we think, and even what we believe. It's no longer about silencing the prophets, it's about drowning their voices in endless noise. And yet, through that noise, the message of Habakkuk still rises. The law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. His lament wasn't just for Israel, it was for humanity. What makes Habakkuk's story powerful is not his anger, but his honesty. He dared to question, to wrestle with doubt, and to face the uncomfortable truth that sometimes faith means waiting in the dark. His words reveal a side of spirituality that we rarely talk about. The struggle between belief and reality, between hope and despair. And that's what makes him so human. Because every generation faces that moment when it feels like the world is collapsing under its own weight, when corruption seems too vast to fight, and silence feels like surrender. But within that silence, something extraordinary happens. When Habakkuk cried out, he wasn't ignored. He was answered, not with comfort, but with revelation. God told him that justice was coming, but not in the way he expected. The message was clear. Look at the nations and watch, for I am doing something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. Imagine hearing that. A promise that even when everything looks lost, there's a design beyond the chaos. A movement of truth hidden in the noise of corruption. That moment marked a transformation, not of circumstances, but of perspective. Habakkuk's pain became purpose. His despair turned into awakening. He began to see that divine justice doesn't always arrive in the way we expect. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, silently, like dawn after a long night. And maybe that's the same revelation our generation needs, to see beyond the surface, beyond what headlines or systems want us to believe, and recognize that the spiritual and the technological aren't separate forces. They're intertwined in the same human story. Because corruption, at its core, is not just political, it's spiritual. It begins when truth is traded for convenience, when conscience is replaced by comfort, and when faith is overshadowed by fear. That's when societies crumble and civilizations repeat the same ancient mistakes. Habakkuk saw it then. We're living it now. But perhaps his story wasn't just a lament. Perhaps it was a a guide through the moral fog of modern times, pointing us back to something pure, something sacred, something uncorrupted. And as the prophet's words continue to echo through centuries, they invite us to do the same thing he did: to question, to seek, and to see. Because maybe what he witnessed wasn't just the fall of a nation, but the awakening of those who dared to look beyond it. The ancient writings say, "The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good." It is one of those verses that sounds simple at first, almost poetic, but when you think about it, it's unsettling. The idea that nothing is hidden, that every action, every thought, every secret lies bare before divine awareness. For centuries, that truth brought both fear and comfort. To some, it meant accountability. To others, it meant protection. It reminded humanity that even in the darkest corners, light could still find them. But somewhere along the way, we tried to recreate that power, to see as God sees, and that S when everything began to change. Today, we live in a world that watches itself. Cameras blink from every street corner. Satellites orbit above us, and the small glass rectangle in our hands tracks where we go, what we say, and even what we think about buying next. We call it progress, but it's really a mirror, reflecting our obsession with control, our hunger to know everything, and our fear of being unseen. What once was divine vision has become digital surveillance. Humanity has built its own all-seeing eye, not out of reverence, but out of anxiety. We're terrified of the unknown, so we created a system that never stops looking. But there's a difference between divine observation and human monitoring. God sees to reveal truth, to expose what is hidden for the sake of healing, redemption, and justice. The modern eye, however, watches to record, to categorize, to predict. It doesn't understand mercy. It only understands data. And in this transformation, something sacred has been lost. We replaced spiritual awareness with mechanical precision. We built machines that recognize faces but not souls. We've given algorithms the ability to observe everything, but the wisdom to understand nothing. Think about that for a moment. We live in an age where your emotions can be measured by the way you blink, your thoughts guessed by the words you hesitate to type. Our digital footprints reveal more about us than our closest friends do. The world has become transparent, but not enlightened. We have visibility without understanding, connection without intimacy. The all-seeing systems promise safety, but they feed on exposure. And maybe that's the greatest irony of all. In trying to become gods, we've turned ourselves into subjects of our own creation. It's easy to forget how subtle this transformation was. It didn't happen through force, but through convenience. We invited the watchmen in. We installed the cameras, allowed the tracking, surrendered our privacy. Not because someone demanded it, but because it made life easier. Every click, every scan, every small decision fed a greater network that now knows us better than we know ourselves. It began as technology, but it has become theology, a new religion built on the belief that visibility equals truth. But true vision, the kind that Scripture speaks of, isn't about control. It's about revelation. When the eyes of the Lord watch, they don't imprison, they illuminate. They see not to judge, but to awaken. And that's what separates the divine from the digital, because one looks to save, while the other looks to own. The ancient prophets understood this long before the first lens was ever invented. They knew that when humanity tried to imitate the divine, it would always end up distorting it. We see that distortion now, not in temples or idols, but in networks and screens. The more we look through these artificial eyes, the more we begin to see the world differently, and not always for the better. We start to believe that everything valuable must be visible, that everything unseen must be irrelevant. But God's way has always been the opposite. He moves in silence, works in the hidden places, reveals truth not through power, but through purpose. That is the revelation Habakkuk grasped in his time, and it as the same lesson our generation seems to have forgotten. Maybe that's why this moment in history feels so heavy, because deep down, we sense that what we've built isn't just watching us, it's shaping us. The eye no longer merely observes, it defines reality. And as we continue to surrender our sight to systems that never blink, the question grows louder. Have we become what we once feared? Or have we simply lost the difference between being watched and being truly seen? The line between those two may seem small, but it's everything. And somewhere within that line lies the heart of this prophecy, one that began with a cry for justice, and now echoes through the hum of machines that see everything, yet understand nothing. In the past, the prophets spoke of an all-seeing presence, a gaze that reached across the heavens, watching over nations, kings, and hearts. Today, the presence doesn't come from the clouds. It glows from our screens, blinks from our cameras, and hums quietly inside the devices we keep beside our beds. The all-seeing eye is no longer a symbol carved into ancient stone. It's a network, silent, invisible, and omnipresent. And the strangest part? We built it ourselves. Every second, information about our lives travels through this vast web. Our faces, our voices, our movements, our thoughts. Everything becomes data. Systems of recognition trace the lines of our expressions, predict our reactions, and even anticipate our desires before we're aware of them. We live inside a digital cathedral of constant observation, where the prayers are replaced by patterns and the offerings are our attention. This is the age of the digital eye, the machine that never blinks, the silent witness to a humanity that willingly surrendered its privacy in exchange for convenience. It started with simple promises: safety, efficiency, personalization. But behind every smart system lies a deeper design, a structure built to know us better than we know ourselves. Algorithms now hold the keys to our habits, predicting not just what we'll buy, but what we'll believe. Facial recognition systems scan airports, cities, and even classrooms, mapping identities into an endless archive. The eyes of this new world don't see with compassion or judgment. They see in numbers, probabilities, and behavioral models. To them, we're not souls, we're signals. And yet, there's something eerily familiar about this pursuit of omniscience. Ancient civilizations built towers to reach the heavens, symbols of human pride and power. Today, we've replaced bricks with code, but the intention remains the same: to become gods of our own creation, to see all, know all, and control all. What began as innovation has quietly become imitation, a mirror image of divine perception, stripped of divinity. The spiritual has been replaced by the synthetic. What was once sacred has been digitized. We live under the gaze of billions of lenses, cameras on our streets, satellites above our skies, sensors in our homes. Each device feeds a system that never forgets. We've entered an era where nothing truly disappears, where every word, image, or decision leaves a permanent imprint. This is more than surveillance. It's memory without mercy, and it's changing the way we think, the way we act, the way we trust. People behave differently when they know they're being watched, even if they don't realize it. The presence of the eye shapes our decisions, molds our instincts, and redefines what it means to be human. But unlike the eyes of the Lord, which see for the sake of truth, these eyes see for the sake of control. They don't reveal what's hidden to heal it. They expose what's private to predict it. It's not revelation, it's replication. Humanity has created an artificial omnipresence, a shadow of divinity coded into silicon and glass. And in doing so, we've blurred the line between connection and captivity. Think about the irony. We hold in our hands the same devices that watch us. The same screens that promise freedom have become our windows and our cages. We scroll, we share, we expose ourselves willingly, each action feeding the very system that observes us. The prophets once warned of idols, creations of human hands that would one day turn against their makers. Perhaps they weren't speaking only of statues, but of systems. Because now, our idols don't stand in temples. They stand in our pockets. And yet, deep within this digital storm, there's still a quiet question that lingers, one that echoes from Habakkuk as time to ours. Are we being watched, or are we watching ourselves become something else? That question doesn't end the story. It opens it. Because what comes next isn't about technology alone. It's about transformation, about the decisions we make when the light never turns off and the truth hides in plain sight. There was a time when humanity looked to the heavens for guidance, when people believed that only the divine could see all things, know all things, and hold all power. But somewhere along our journey, that reverence turned into imitation. We no longer lift our eyes to the sky in search of the watchers, because we've become them. Through machines, networks, and satellites, we've built our own pantheon of observation, a system that promises the same attributes once reserved for God: omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence, but without the wisdom that gave those powers meaning. It started subtly, like every great transformation does. We created machines to extend our reach, to simplify our lives, to make the world smaller. But with each innovation, the boundary between creation and creator blurred a little more. Satellites gave us eyes that never blink. Data networks gave us memory that never fades. Artificial intelligence gave us judgment that never sleeps. And though we call it progress, it mirrors something much older, the same ancient temptation whispered in the garden: "You shall be like God." Every second, millions of signals move through the air, invisible currents carrying information across continents, connecting minds, tracking movement, predicting thought. We have built a world where nothing escapes our gaze, where the unseen becomes visible with a click, and the unknown becomes measurable. Humanity has become its own watcher, hovering above the earth, collecting, classifying, and controlling. What was once divine oversight has become human surveillance. And the irony is that the more we try to see everything, the less we truly understand. Omnipresence used to be a mystery, something beyond human comprehension. Now, it's an ambition. Our devices listen while we sleep, our apps track every heartbeat, and our satellites map the globe in real time. We've replaced the heavens with hard drives and the angels with algorithms. But what we've gained in information, we've lost in insight. True vision was never about seeing everything. It was about seeing deeply. Machines can analyze patterns, but they can't perceive meaning. They can process infinite data, but they can't discern truth. That, as the paradox of our creation, we've achieved the imitation of God as power without the reflection of His heart. We often justify it in the name of safety, efficiency, or progress. But beneath those reasons lies something more primal, a desire to control what we fear, to predict what we can't understand. We build systems to feel secure, forgetting that every layer of security also builds a cage. The more we connect, the more we confine. The more we observe, the less we trust. It is as if the act of trying to become all-seeing has blinded us to what truly matters, the unseen qualities that make us human: conscience, empathy, faith, and perhaps that, as the hidden truth behind this transformation, that our pursuit of godlike power reveals not strength, but insecurity. We create eyes in the sky because we no longer trust the eye within. We build digital omniscience because we've lost spiritual discernment. We chase infinite knowledge but neglect eternal wisdom. The prophets warned of this imbalance, of a time when humanity would mistake information for truth and power for purpose. Maybe that time isn't coming. Maybe it's already here. Look at the world we've built. We can zoom into any city on Earth, watch live feeds of streets thousands of miles away, listen to voices that aren't ours. We hold the world in our hands, but it's made of glass, fragile, reflective, and deceptive. What we see is not reality, but representation. We are surrounded by images, data, and illusions that make us feel all-knowing, yet we remain lost in understanding. That's the hidden cost of becoming the Watchers. The more we imitate the divine, the further we drift from the divine itself. And still the question lingers, not as accusation, but as revelation. Have we tried to become the new Watchers of the world? If so, what have we truly seen? Have we found enlightenment, or only built systems that watch but never feel, that know but never care? The more we stare into the eyes of our own creation, the more we risk seeing a reflection we no longer recognize. And maybe that is the real warning buried inside Habakkuk's as prophecy. Not just that evil would rise again, but that humanity, in its hunger to play God, would forget what it means to be human. That thought alone carries weight, the kind that lingers after the screen goes dark. Because the story isn't about machines replacing us. It's about what happens when we surrender our soul to what we've made. And as the hum of satellites echoes above and the glow of screens surrounds us, we can almost feel it. That quiet tension between heaven's watchers and Earth's systems. A reflection that feels too familiar to ignore. The symbol of the all-seeing eye has always carried power. A quiet, magnetic force that transcended cultures and centuries. In its original form, it represented divine awareness, the reminder that nothing escapes the gaze of truth. The eye was never meant to intimidate, it was meant to illuminate. It symbolized understanding, compassion, and the spiritual reality that we are known, fully seen, yet still loved. But over time, that symbol was stripped of its sacred meaning and rebranded into something entirely different. What once stood for revelation has become a representation of control. What once belonged to heaven now stares at us from the walls of empires, currencies, and digital screens. If you look closely, you'll see it everywhere, hidden in logos, architecture, and art. The triangle with an eye at its center has become a global emblem, no longer tied to divine watchfulness, but to human authority. Its light no longer descends from heaven, it shines downward, marking hierarchy and surveillance. It's in the corner of the dollar bill, on monuments, in secret society insignias, and, more subtly, in the interface of the world we interact with daily. It's the symbol of a world that watches, but not to protect, to predict, or to guide, to observe, to measure, to own. This evolution isn't accidental. Humanity has always had a fascination with power hidden behind symbols. Every generation creates its own mythology, its own visual language to express what it fears and worships. The ancient eye represented divine perception, the idea that God sees beyond appearances into the truth of the soul. The modern eye represents the opposite, artificial omniscience. It's the illusion of knowing everything while understanding nothing. It's the mark of a civilization obsessed with control disguised as enlightenment. And perhaps that's the most striking revelation of all, that the sacred has been inverted. The eye that once gazed from heaven in mercy now glares from the earth in dominance. It doesn't watch to reveal truth, but to manipulate it. It doesn't see with love, but with strategy. This false all-seeing presence is built on data, algorithms, and unrelenting observation. A mechanical god replacing a living one. We've taken the divine blueprint and redrawn it in cold precision, turning awareness into analytics and understanding into ownership. It's easy to dismiss symbols as harmless, just art, just coincidence, but symbols have power because they speak to the subconscious. They shape how we perceive the world without us even noticing. That's why the all-seeing eye appears not only in stone or ink, but in stories, music videos, movies, and advertisements. It's everywhere, not because of conspiracy, but because it resonates with something deep within the human psyche, the desire to be both seen and in control. The irony is that in trying to be seen, we've become exposed. In trying to control, we've become controlled. The transformation of this symbol tells the story of our age. We took something divine and redefined it through human ambition. We turned spiritual watchfulness into global surveillance, sacred light into artificial glow. It's not about a secret group or hidden agenda. It is about a deeper truth hiding in plain sight. We've replaced reverence with curiosity, submission with domination, and awe with arrogance. And yet, despite all this, the original meaning of the eye still lingers, faint but unextinguished. A whisper from the past reminding us that sight was never meant to enslave, it was meant to awaken. The prophets spoke of eyes filled with fire, symbols of divine insight that pierce deception and reveal truth. Today, those flames are reflected in LED lights and glowing screens. The fire hasn't vanished, it has changed form. But unlike the divine fire that purifies, this one consumes. It feeds on our attention, our data, our silence, and the more we stare back at it, the more it grows. That is the tragedy of the false all-seeing eye. It doesn't need to chase us. We willingly look into it every day. And maybe that's what makes this moment so spiritually significant. Because the eye itself isn't the enemy. It's the mirror. It reflects who we've become and what we worship now. It shows a humanity that traded faith for fascination, mystery for machinery, purpose for power. But within every distortion lies a clue to the original design. If the false eye exists, it's because a true one came before it. And perhaps, beneath all the layers of manipulation, that truth is still waiting to be seen. And as the light from that symbol flickers across our modern world, in art, in culture, in the very technology that shapes our lives, one can't help but wonder if the prophets already saw this transformation. If they understood that the greatest battle wouldn't be for sight itself, but for what we choose to see. Habakkuk once wrote, "The arrogant man will not rest until he has gathered all nations under his rule." At first glance, it sounds like an ancient warning about a tyrant or empire long gone, but the deeper you look, the more it feels like a prophecy written for this very age. His words carry the weight of something far greater than a kingdom or a king. They describe a mentality, a hunger for dominance that transcends time. That same spirit of control is alive today, not through armies or borders, but through networks, corporations, and governments that rule not by sword, but by information. The thrones of power have changed shape, yet their ambition remains the same: to gather, to centralize, to command. In the prophets' time, power was visible. You could see it in palaces and armies, in gold and conquest. Today, power is invisible, but far more pervasive. It lives inside data centers, in code, in decisions made by unseen systems. The new empire doesn't build towers of stone. It builds digital towers that rise higher than Babel ever did. Every click, every face scanned, every word recorded adds another brick to the structure of global control. And what is most unsettling is that we are not merely subjects of this empire. We its builders. We've allowed convenience to become the currency of control. We accept the trade without reading the terms. Access for privacy, connection for autonomy, comfort for freedom. Governments and corporations alike gather data as ancient kings gathered tribute. The empires of old wanted land and labor. The empires of today want attention and information. They don't conquer by war, but by algorithm. They don't need to break the body to own the mind. And in this quiet conquest, Habakkuk's warning begins to feel like a reflection of our reality. The arrogance he described wasn't just political, it was spiritual. It's the belief that man can rule the world without God, that wisdom can be replaced by intelligence, that morality can be coded into machines. We've replaced commandments with terms of service and prophecy with programming. We're told that more data will bring truth, that more control will bring peace. But control without conscience always leads to corruption. And beneath the polished surface of our modern systems lies the same pride that toppled every empire before us. We call it progress, but it's really centralization, a return to the tower. One network, one standard, one source of truth. A digital Babel where everyone speaks through the same devices, filtered by the same systems, watched by the same eyes. It's the illusion of unity masking the reality of control. And when you think about it, Habakkuk's words feel less like history and more like revelation. The arrogant man enlarges his desire as hell and is like death. He cannot be satisfied. The hunger for total dominion never ends. It just changes form. And yet, even as this empire grows, there's something deeper unfolding. Something that challenges how we see the world and ourselves. Because this isn't just about surveillance or politics. It's about the human soul's relationship with power. Every generation faces the same temptation, to build its own tower, to reach beyond its limits, to play God. What we're witnessing today is not just technological evolution, it's a spiritual experiment. The systems we've built don't only reflect our intelligence, they reveal our desires. They show what happens when the pursuit of knowledge forgets the pursuit of wisdom. Habakkuk's cry wasn't just for his people, it was for humanity. He saw what happens when pride becomes a system, when truth becomes a tool, when control becomes a creed. His words pierce through centuries of progress and whisper into our modern world. This, too, is Babylon, the empire that knows no rest, the tower that touches the clouds but forgets the ground beneath it. And if that's true, then maybe the question isn't whether Habakkuk foresaw our time, but whether we are reliving his warning, an age where the arrogance of power builds faster than the wisdom to contain it. Because if history teaches anything, it's that towers eventually fall. Not because they aren't strong enough, but because they are built on pride. And as our digital empire rises higher each day, glowing, connected, omnipresent, one can almost feel that same ancient tension returning. The same echo of prophecy, the same quiet reminder that no system, no empire, no algorithm can replace the truth that power without purpose always collapses under its own weight. And perhaps, in that collapse, something far more profound is waiting to be revealed. It's strange how quickly we've grown comfortable with the idea of being watched. Once, it was the eyes of heaven that gave people comfort, the thought that a divine presence saw their struggles, their pain, their truth. Now, that comfort has been outsourced. We look to systems instead of the sacred, to networks instead of prayer. The modern world doesn't say, God is watching, it says, the system is. The difference may seem small, but spiritually, it changes everything. Because one brings peace, the other brings pressure. One frees, the other binds. And somewhere in that exchange, faith quietly became dependence. We used to believe that trust was built on unseen strength, that faith meant walking even when the path wasn't clear. But the age of algorithms has replaced mystery with measurement. Now we don't wait for revelation. We refresh the feed. We don't seek truth. We search for results. Our hearts have learned to worship what responds instantly, even if it understands nothing. The machine has become our silent confessor, our constant witness, our substitute for the divine. We've traded prayer for prediction, intuition for calculation, and in doing so, we've created an illusion of safety that feels spiritual, but isn't. The promise of technology is seductive. A world where nothing is hidden, where every danger is detected, where life itself can be managed, calculated, and optimized. But that promise carries a quiet cost. Constant surveillance may protect us from harm, but it also teaches us to live in fear. Fear of mistakes, of exposure, of being unseen. Faith, at its core, asks us to trust what we cannot control. Technology asks us to control what we cannot trust. And between those two forces, the human soul stands divided, torn between belief and dependency, between freedom and the illusion of it. It's easy to see why people turn to the machine for comfort. It offers answers faster than prayer ever could. It provides guidance, certainty, and even companionship. It listens when we speak. It remembers what we like. It anticipates what we need. But this isn't faith, it's feedback. It gives us what we want, not what we need. It learns from our behavior, not our hearts. And the danger is that in this constant exchange we start to believe that wisdom and information are the same thing, that knowing more means understanding more. But knowledge without discernment is just noise, and the more we depend on the system, the less we hear the quiet voice within us. This new kind of omnipresence feels divine, but it lacks divinity. It's everywhere, yet nowhere sacred. It sees everything but understands nothing. It can track every heartbeat, yet cannot feel one. The algorithms that guide us were never meant to shepherd souls. They were built to predict patterns. And still we kneel before them daily, asking them what to buy, where to go, who to follow, and who to become. The great transformation of our age isn't that machines are thinking. It is that humans have stopped. We've replaced reflection with reaction, faith with feedback loops. We no longer ask, what does God see in me, but what does the system know about me? Maybe that's the true revelation of our time, that we've a mistaken surveillance for salvation. The more we rely on being seen by machines, the more invisible we become to ourselves. It's as if we've handed over our souls in exchange for certainty, forgetting that true faith was never about knowing, it was about trusting. The prophets understood that. They lived in uncertainty, yet found peace. They waited, even when silence felt unbearable. Today, silence feels like failure. Stillness feels like disconnection. We fear being unseen so much that we've built an entire world where nothing can hide, not even our thoughts. And yet, maybe that's exactly where the transformation begins, not in resistance, but in awareness. Because when we stop to ask, if we no longer trust God to see us and instead trust machines, what have we become? We open a door back to something deeper. That question itself is an act of faith, a moment of honesty in a world addicted to observation. And somewhere in that pause, in that reflection, we begin to see the truth, that no amount of data can replace divine discernment, and no machine, no matter how intelligent, can understand the soul that built it. But this realization isn't an ending. It's the start of a new revelation, one that challenges the very foundation of what we believe about power, purpose, and the meaning of being seen. Habakkuk, as final words, rise like a quiet light after a long storm. Even if the fig tree does not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. It's a strange kind of hope, not the kind that waits for things to get better, but the kind that chooses to believe even when everything falls apart. He lived in an age of chaos, surrounded by injustice and fear, and yet his response wasn't despair. It was faith. That's the paradox of his message. When everything seemed to be collapsing, he found peace not in what he could see, but in the one who could see him.
And maybe that's the truth we've forgotten in this modern age of vigilance. We've built a world obsessed with visibility, where every move is traced, every emotion analyzed, every secret stored. We believe that safety comes from being watched, from being constantly measured, from never being alone. But Habakkuk's hope came from something completely different. His confidence wasn't in being seen, it was in being known. There's a difference. To be seen is to be observed. To be known is to be understood. The gaze of God liberates because it recognizes essence, not performance. The gaze of man, however, imprisons because it records, categorizes, and never forgets. That's the quiet tragedy of our generation. We've confused exposure with connection. We think that being visible means being valued. But real peace doesn't come from algorithms that track us. It comes from grace that embraces us. Habakkuk understood that his world was collapsing under violence and corruption, yet his faith remained intact because his trust was placed not in systems but in presence. When he said, "I will rejoice," it wasn't denial, it was defiance. It was the decision to rise above fear, to believe in purpose, even when everything visible screamed the opposite. In a time where we are constantly observed by machines, that kind of faith feels almost rebellious. It's an act of resistance to trust in what can't be quantified, to believe in what can't be programmed. Because while surveillance creates obedience through fear, faith creates courage through love. One demands submission, the other inspires transformation. One records every mistake, the other forgives it. And perhaps that's why the prophet's final words still resonate so deeply, because they remind us that true freedom is not found in being monitored, but in being guided. The systems we've built promise control, the ability to predict, to protect. But what they cannot offer is redemption. They can analyze behavior but cannot heal the heart. They can detect threats but cannot discern meaning. They can store memory but cannot restore hope. The more we rely on them, the more we risk losing the very thing that makes us human, the capacity to trust without proof, to walk without seeing, to believe without understanding. That's what Habakkuk teaches, that faith isn't blind. It's brave. It doesn't ignore reality. It redefines it. Even now, in the age of cameras and clouds, that same faith is possible. It's the quiet conviction that there's a kind of vision beyond surveillance, a gaze that doesn't judge by metrics, but by mercy. The divine eye doesn't demand perfection. It calls us to authenticity. It doesn't watch to punish. It watches to protect. And in a world where everyone is trying to be noticed, maybe the most powerful act is to rest in the assurance that you already are, not by machines, not by men, but by something infinitely greater. That's the difference between being seen and being safe. The first demands performance. The second invites peace. Habakkuk's hope wasn't rooted in outcomes, but in relationship. He didn't wait for the world to change before he believed. And through that belief, he changed how he saw the world. And maybe that's the lesson our generation needs most. Because when the light of every screen fades and the eyes of the system turn away, there remains one gaze that never wavers, not because it needs to know, but because it already does. And as the noise of this digital age grows louder, that whisper of ancient faith becomes even more precious. The world tells us to be visible. God calls us to be still. The world tells us to seek control. God teaches us to surrender. And maybe that's the real revolution, not to escape the systems we've built, but to remember the truth they can never replicate. Because while the watchers of this world demand our attention, the one who truly sees us asks only for our trust. And that trust, fragile, quiet, and unseen, is where the story begins to turn. Maybe the question was never really about who's watching us, but who we've become while being watched. Somewhere along this journey, between ancient prophecy and modern technology, between heaven's gaze and humanity's surveillance, something inside us changed. We learned to live under observation, to perform instead of simply exist, to curate our lives instead of live them. We built a world where everyone is both observer and observed, where every click, every post, every movement becomes part of an invisible record. And in doing so, we forgot that the most important IISNT, the one that looks at us from above or behind a screen, it's the one that looks from within. That inner eye, conscience, soul, spirit, call it what you will, sees differently. It doesn't track, it discerns, it doesn't analyze, it understands. It asks questions no machine can compute. Who am I becoming? What do I truly value? What have I allowed to shape me? In an age where the world's attention is currency, introspection has become an act of rebellion. To pause and look inward, to measure your life not by visibility but by authenticity. That something the system can replicate. That the kind of awareness the prophet spoke of. A vision not just of the world outside, but of the heart within. Because maybe that what the eye that sees all things was meant to remind us of, not that we are being watched, but that we are seen, not as data, but as souls. Habakkuk understood this deeply. His vision wasn't about control, it was about awakening. He didn't speak to a world of machines, but his words fit ours perfectly. The arrogant still build their towers. The powerful still gather their nations. The systems still watch, measure, and manipulate. But the truth remains unchanged, no matter how advanced the eyes of this world become. There is still a gaze greater than all of them, one that sees through illusion, through fear, through the masks we wear, and that gaze calls not for performance, but for honesty. It's in that honesty that transformation begins. Because once you realize you don't need to be constantly seen to be significant, you start to reclaim your peace. Once you understand that the truest kind of visibility is spiritual, not digital, you begin to live differently. You stop existing for attention and start existing for purpose. That the quiet revolution hidden inside the prophet's words, a call to return to truth in a time obsessed with appearances. And that's why these messages, though written thousands of years ago, still resonate so powerfully today. They aren't relics of the past, they're revelations for the present. And maybe that SYUV made it this far into this message, because deep down you feel it too. That quiet pull toward something real, something sacred, something that can't be measured by screens or algorithms. The truth that even in a world where everything is seen, the only sight that truly matters is the one that reveals who we are becoming. So if this message spoke to something in you, if it stirred a memory, a realization, or even a question, don't let it fade into the noise. Share what you think. I want to know your perspective, your interpretation, your insight into what the prophets might have seen. Do you believe they foresaw this era we're living in, this digital tower of Babel, this world under constant watch? And if you do, if you believe these ancient visions were more than poetry, if you feel that they were warnings meant for our generation, then let's keep this journey alive together. Leave your like, subscribe, and stay with me for what comes next. Because the story doesn't end here. In fact, it's only beginning. The next revelation, the next piece of this puzzle, might just open your eyes in ways you never imagined and change the way you see everything.